Hi, my name's Duncan and I'm a software architect for SSW, and today in Dev Superpowers we're doing the second part of a two-part series on Angular 2. Now, if you haven't joined us before for a Dev Superpowers, what it's all about is getting our hands dirty, getting our hands on the code and using the latest stacks and technologies in software development. And if you didn't join us for the first part in this series, I highly recommend you go check it out now because we're going to directly build on it, so it might be a little bit confusing if you haven't seen the first part in this series. So where did we kick off? Well, we kicked off here, where we'd made this very simple first step of making a Pig of the Month application. And I wanted to make something that was a little bit more than Hello World, something that was going to challenge me to use Angular in a real world scenario to make this application for us at SSW to track our weight. And we did three big things. First of all, we set up our application with Angular 2, and we did that by copying the angular.io docs, their getting started docs. And then second, we made a service to call our backend to get an array of people and their weights. And then the third thing we did, we made a couple of components and we used some of the new Angular 2 template syntax to bind all that data onto the page here and to get this table. So that's where we came from and that's where we're up to, and we'll look at the code in a second. But where are we heading? So where we want to head with this application is we want to head to this screen here. So what we have is a table with Crud functionality, so we can actually edit and do things to this table. And then we want to put this chart in. And in particular, we want to add a couple of more Crud functionalities to add a new person and save the data back to our backend. So that's where we want to get to today. So let's jump in and have a look at some of the code. So this is our Pig of the Month application, and we can see over here on the left in our Explorer the basic structure. So we had a bunch of .json files for setting up our TypeScript compiler and settings, and our package.json for all of our third-party dependencies, and our index.html where we were listing a few CDNs for third-party libraries like Bootstrap CSS, and we'd set up our dependencies for Angular. We were setting up our module loader here, and we were passing it our main file to bootstrap our application. And then we had our initial My App element, and our top-level app component for our Angular app. So if we have a look again at the Solution Explorer, we have this app folder where we've got all of our application logic, our Angular code. And in here we have this main TS that we're pointing to over here in this app.main. And we're bootstrapping the application by passing it our app component. So we're importing our app component, our bootstrap function here from Angular 2, and then we're passing it our top-level component, our app component, and that is going to bootstrap our application. And then we had, inside our components folder, we had two components, an app and a weights component. And then in our services folder, we have a people service that we're going to use. So one thing I want to do before getting started here, there's actually three big things I want to do today. First thing, I want to do a bit of Boy Scouting or cleaning up the code. Two, I want to update to the latest version of Angular 2 because we did this last month in beta 7 and now they're up to beta 12. And second of all, I want to bring in the chart dependencies and build that chart out. And third, I want to add those Crud functionalities. So let's do a bit of a cleanup straight off the bat. First thing I see here is if I open up this component and then this app folder, I also have the compiled code here, this .js extension and this .js map. And it just clunks up the view and makes it harder to read. So in Visual Studio Code, we could do two things. We could push all of that compiled code into a distributable folder, which I'd probably do in a production app. But in this case, I just want to hide it from our view. So I'm going to Control-Shift-P, and I'm going to open the command palette and look for our workspace settings. And I'm going to come in here, and I just want to list some excluded files. So those files will be anything in the app folder. So anything that begins with app / /star/star.js we want to get rid of. And I'll just copy that line. And anything that ends in .map as well. So if we come back over here and have a look, we'll see in the Solution Explorer, but we're no longer seeing our .js extensions. So things will be much cleaner. When we look at the weights component and refresh that, we'll see that we're only seeing the .html and the .ts extension. All of our compiled code is now just hidden away, which makes it easier to navigate. Okay, so that was one of the first things I wanted to do to clean up. But the second thing I want to do is if we look at our package.json, we'll see here that we're using beta 7. And I want to update this to the latest version. And the way I do that is very similar to how I bootstrap my Angular applications to start off. At the moment in particular, when Angular's in beta, currently in beta status, is I head over to the Angular documentation, I go to their Getting Started tutorial, and I scroll all the way to the bottom where they've got all the code and tabs needed to bootstrap a very simple hello world. And I like doing this because this helps me stay up to date with what the changes are with the framework. And so I'm just going to copy my dependencies there from this list here. So you can see they've got this is set up for package.json. And I'm going to pop back over to my package.json, and I'm just going to paste over the top of my dependencies the latest ones. So now we're going to be referencing beta 12. So to use that, I need to pop over to the command line, and I'm just going to open a new console window here at this project level. And I'm just going to do an npm I for install and let that run in the background. So while that's running away, let's have a look at what we need to do to get from here, where we've just got a table and we're binding the data from what we're getting back from our backend, and we want to go to here. So we need to have this this chart, and we want to bring in a couple of dependencies to make this chart. And the dependency I've chosen to use is called chart.js. So chart.js is a very popular JavaScript charting library. It's open source and it has great basic simple charting abilities. But I want to wrap this inside of Angular 2, so I'm going to use a second dependency called ng2-charts. So I'm going to use this. Now, I could have wrapped chart.js in my own Angular 2 directive, and I've actually done that in the past, and it's not too hard to do. But I wanted to show you guys a way of being able to set this up that's kind of a little future-proof, because this ng2-charts is likely to stay popular and keep getting updated as Angular 2 moves along. So learning this is kind of a safety bet or a guess on my behalf to say, well, this is probably worth investing a little bit of learning around because I'll use it again and it's can continue to be supported. So if we want to use this ng2-charts, we've got to bring in a couple of different dependencies. So first of all, we need to bring in chart.js. So just going to pop back over, open up another command window here. And I'm going to do an npm install on chart.js, but I also need to bring in ng2-charts as well. So I'll kick that off and then let that go and get those as well. So that's going to get all the dependencies that we need, but there's a couple other things that I need to set up. I also need to add a script reference here to our index page so that we have a global reference to chart.js. So I'm just going to pop that at the bottom here underneath our other dependencies. So once we've done that, then we can import our chart directives from this library. So I'm going to copy that, and where I'm going to build out this application or build out this chart is in the weights component. And for simplicity, I'm actually going to keep it in the weights component, but probably in a larger application, I would make this chart inside of its own component. But to keep it simpler to do here, I'm just going to put it in the weights component. So I come up here and just give us a bit more space, drag that across a little bit. And I'm going to add this import statement. And at the moment, we actually haven't got it, so Visual Studio Code showing us a red squiggly here saying it doesn't have this ng2-charts yet. So if I pop back over, we'll see that it's complaining about letting me install these, need to be as root administrator. So I might just turn off our server here that's running the application. Let me just check quickly that the other ones have finished off. Okay, so I'm just going to shut down Commander and close these consoles and pop back into our Solution Explorer. And you can see we have a Node modules folder and it's brought over all of our dependencies, but it didn't actually bring in the chart ones that we just ran. So I'm going to Control-Shift-T, which is a keyboard shortcut I have set up with a Visual Studio extension called Launcher, which will launch us onto the right path here. But it's actually popped us a few levels too deep, so I'm just going to CD back. And we want to be just on the project level of this application. And then we're going to install those two again. So I'll just run that and let it run in the background here. So I'm showing you a few different Visual Studio extensions today, and I actually have a blog post because last episode of Dev Superpowers, a bunch of people asked me, what are all of these Visual Studio Code extensions you're using and what are your favorites? So I have a blog post here which is 5 awesome Visual Studio Code extensions for Angular 2, and these are the ones that I use every day when I'm doing Angular 2. So 2 you'll see me use today a lot of is relative path, which allows me to just search for a file and it will put into the TypeScript the relative path to that file. Really handy. And also as launcher, which you saw me use just then to be able to Control-Shift-T to launch the command line. So if we come back over, we can see that those files have now been included, or those dependencies. And you'll frequently see this red squiggly underneath some of your dependencies, and you'll need to actually close and open Visual Studio Code to get it to pick up this ng2-charts for the first time. But if you come over and have a look at our node modules, we'll probably see that ng2-charts is listed down in here, and it is. So we know that it's come in. So I'm just going to ignore that for a second, it'll go away. Okay, so we've brought in these 2 packages and we've brought in a script tag on our index page. And I know there's a few different speed humps that we're going to have to, or blockages we're going to have to get past to be able to use this library. And I'm going to show you those as we go. But I'm going to pop back over to the documentation here. And I'm actually just going to copy a little bit of their code to make this easier. So I want to get this very similar look and feel to this demo here they've got with a line chart, where you can hover over points and it shows you a nice legend and so forth. And it's kind of dynamic. So I'm just going to copy this chunk of code out of there and come back to our weights component and open up weights component folder and then go to our HTML, just give us a bit more space. And I'm going to put it in between our little piggy picture and our table. So this will become the directive that's going to insert our chart. Now I'm going to clean this up a bit because we've copied it from them. We don't need any of these events to be raised when we work with the chart. And also we don't need a legend because I'm going to make my own legend. So get rid of that. And I'm actually, rather than just initializing all these values in my component and then binding onto them, I'm actually going to put them all onto a class. So what I want to do here is just select this line chart, and then I'm going to use Visual Studio Code shortcut, which is Control-D, to select the next instance of line chart text anywhere in the HTML, and I'll get multi-cursor. So I'm just going to change all those to say chart, and then I'm just going to copy all of that text because I'm going to make a class out of it in a second. And then at the front here, I'm going to put them all on a chart object. So I'm going to go make a new class called chart and new it up in my component. And then I'm going to put these properties onto it. So we've got that running for now. Let's pop back over. And previously we made a models .ts file. And inside here we had two classes, a person and a weight, and we're going to use those heavily today, but also I want to make a new class, so I'm going to export that class called chart. And bear with me, there's a little bit of text editing here to get this to work, but Visual Studio Code shines at this. So I'm just going to use that keyboard shortcut again, Control D to get the multi-cursor over the quote there. And then I'm just going to make all of these of class or of type any array. And then I'm just going to format that to make it a bit nicer, because they're all going to be in any array, so their type is of array, except for the chart options, which I know will be an object, and this chart type, which I know will be of type string. So now we can new up this chart class in our component. So if we come back to our weights component, we need to import it. And we're already importing that models file. So now I can ask for the chart. And I can come down here and say chart equals a new chart, like so. And now we can build up our chart object to pass to the chart directive on this chart class here. But like I said, there's a few things we need to do to get this working that aren't actually in the docs. And this is kind of one of the things about Angular 2 at the moment being in beta is the actual framework itself has great documentation. It's really easy to use and it's really stable. But the third-party libraries is still kind of just starting to boom and just starting to emerge, seeing all the vendors bring out different things. So there's three distinct things I had to do to get this working, and I had to actually go into the GitHub issues for ng2-charts to figure this out. So I'll save you some time and show you what I did. So we've got this chart object, and we've also got the directive on the page. Now we need to come over here and build up that chart object. So we've only got one method on this weights component, which is a get method, which calls out to our people service and brings back an array of people and their weights. And we can't really build this chart until we have those people to populate the data. So once we get that, I'm going to call a function that I haven't made yet called format chart data, like so. And so once the people's back and we're bound to it, then we can use it. And then I'm going to call this function, which we're making right now, called format chart data. And we're going to have to set up a couple of local properties to push our people's data that's been formatted into our chart data to use. So I'm going to make one property called let chart data. And I'm going to initialize it to an empty array. And then I'm going to do let chart series also equal an empty array here. Now you can see I'm using let versus var, which is an ECMAScript 6 syntax that we can get from using TypeScript. And basically that means that it's block scoped. So by default, I use let everywhere unless I need to use var to do something more JavaScripty. So once I've done that, I can grab the people array and I can do a for each on it. And when I for each over it, I'm going to get a person out of each time. And when I get that person, I want to populate this chart data and this chart series. And so to do that, I'm going to say underscore chart data equals, well actually, I'm not going to be an equals, it's something I'm going to push onto it. So it's an empty array, and I'm going to push onto that array the arrays of weight from each person. So to do that, I'm going to go person dot, and you'll see I get IntelliSense here because type inference with TypeScript is saying, I know you're using person of type person, and these are its properties. So I know it has a weights, and then I'm going to map that to a new object. So I'm going to map it to, I'm just going to use a very terse local variable here of w because I'm only using it right in this spot. And I'm going to return from there, just wrap that up. I'm going to return w dot, and you'll see I continue to get IntelliSense here, kilogram. So I'm just going to make a new array and for each person of just their weights, and then push that onto the chart data array. So we have that done. And now also for each person, I need to do the chart series. So chart series dot push, and I'm going to just, this one's going to be simpler. I'm just going to pass on the person dot full name. Okay. So once we have those set up, then we can start to build out our chart object. And this is where TypeScript really shines, because I can just get IntelliSense all the way. So this .chart data will equal the chart data that I just created. And the chart series will be the same thing. And then I don't need to really remember very much because I've set up this class of type chart. And I get IntelliSense here, so chart dot, and I know I need to set up labels, so that will equal this dot months. And if you remember from the first series, we had this months variable at the top, which was a string array, which we're using the moment library to just get all the strings for each month of the year. So we also then need to say what type of chart this is. So we'll go chart type, and it's a line chart. Now the next two, if we look at our chart, is colors and also options. And this is a fair bit to type out, so I'm just going to use a few code snippets that I have already made for this to save you watching that. So just going to copy those two, and then we're going to talk through it. So in here, just paste that in. Alt-Shift-F to format in Visual Studio Code. Just give us a bit more room. So the first one here is this chart options. And I'm going to set this to have two options. One is responsive to true, so when I resize the screen, the chart will also resize. And I'm just going to comment that out for now. And the other one is the multi-tooltip, which means that my tooltip will show not just the value, but also the label. So if we come back over to the browser and have a look, that's where we see this Duncan 75 versus just the value 75. So once we've got that set up, that's our chart options, and I'll come back and talk about this responsive stuff. It's one of the three things you'll have to fix when using this library at the moment. And then we've got our chart colors. So I'm getting a red squiggly here to say we haven't set up any default colors, and we need to say what are the colors that we're going to use for this chart, like what will all the lines be. But once we have that, we're going to take that and we're going to map each color into a new object. And that'll have the stroke color and the point color and the fill and all the things that we need for the chart. So let's go make that right now. So I like to put all these at the top, a la John Papa's style guide, so all our variables and properties are declared, and it's easy to see when you first open the file. So this colors will be of type string array, and I'm going to initialize it to a couple of just default colors. Say red, blue, and green, and say orange. Okay. So now that we have these colors, for each of those, we're going to make an object that has all of these properties on it and set up some of the colors. Okay. So with that done, we're going to run into the first of our three problems for using this library. So I'm going to pop over to the browser, and here is our application not actually running. So if we have a look, we need to just refresh this, and we can see that the server's not started. So I'm going to come over to Commander, just clear this out, and do an Npm Start. So this Npm Start is a script that we have in our package.json file that we copied from the Angular IO site. It just turns on the TypeScript compiler to watch anytime we change a TypeScript file or save it, it will turn it into JavaScript, and also refresh the browser with browser sync. Now, it takes a couple of seconds to kick off, and then it will hijack us and take us over to the browser. But I know there's a problem at the moment with this app because I've already run into it. And the problem will be at the moment is that if we try and use this chart, it's going to run into issues. If we pop back here, we've got this chart data that we're building up, and I'm just going to have to set the responsive flag here back on as the first of these issues. And we can see that it's not actually popping it into our view here. If we have a look, we have our base chart, but it's not initializing it in. So this is one of those common problems that I still have with Angular 2 is I forget to list my directives, and you get this silent error like this. So if we pop back up, we can see that I was importing chart directives here, but I'm not actually using it. I need to actually say in my @component decorator where we tell Angular 2, hey, here's all the properties of this component that you need to add metadata for about it. So one of those is its list of directives. And this will just accept an array, and we can go get help from TypeScript to get our chart directives. But unfortunately, we get this really silent error about it because just one of the things you'll probably come across a few times, you have to set up this directives. Okay, so now when I come back and we go to our console, we're getting this unexpected token. So I know this error as well as coming from the ng2-charts library, and I have a snippet to fix it, and I'm going to talk you through it. So one of the problems is the library is here. If we come over to our index page, where we're setting up our module loader when we're passing in our main file to bootstrap our application, we're setting up a couple of defaults around what things are and our system config, and we need to add to that. So I'm just going to paste this in and then talk it over. So what I just pasted in is this section here. And what I'm saying is when you use ng2-charts, the default extension is JavaScript, not TypeScript. And also when you see ng2-charts in the import statement, can you map it to node modules /ng2-charts so that we can use a normal type of import statement. So this is the first of 3 things we'll need to do to get the charts library working. So with this setup, we should have removed this error about the syntax, and now we see we're getting all sorts of errors around this chart property, this chart class, because what's happening is we're trying to bind this chart to the page, to the DOM, before we actually have all the data to populate it. So what we want to do is we want to actually not put it into the DOM, not initialize it until we get that data back. So one really quick way to do that is to use an ngIf. So if we pop back over to our weights component.html and we look at our base chart here, I'm going to use some structural directives structural template directives from Angular 2. And it's going to look familiar if you've used Angular 1, which is an ngIf equals, and I'm going to put a boolean in here. So is chart data formatted? So if this property here is true, then this ngIf will stamp this into the DOM, but it won't do it until we trigger this flag to be true, which we'll do only once we've initialized the data for the chart. So this is the second of the 3 things I needed to do that weren't quite in the docs to get this working. Okay, so if we pop back over to our weights component, we can set this value up at the top, and it's a boolean, and I'm going to initialize it to false when we first make this weights component. And then once we've formatted all the data here for the chart and we've set it up, I'm going to set it to true because now we have got that data. So this dot is chart formatted equals true, like so. So this is going to be the second thing we need to do. So if we come back, now we're not getting any errors, but we're also not getting any chart. And that's because the responsive flag we have set is setting the height and the width to be 0 so you can't actually see it. So we just need to add a bit of CSS, which is also a really good chance to look at how we get scoping with our CSS now with Angular 2 components. So I'm going to grab a bit of a code snippet here, save me from typing it out. And over in our weights component folder, we have a .html and we have a .component, but we can also make a specific CSS file just for this component, which we're going to do. So to do that, I need to just going to copy this line here, and it's not a template URL, it's a styles URL, and we're pointing to a path which we haven't got yet, which will be a weights.component.css. So I'm just going to copy that. And if I'm getting an error, and I know that error, it's a bit cryptic to read it from the TypeScript hover hint here, but I know that this styles URL expects everything to be an array. So it's an array of strings or paths. So I'm just going to wrap it in an array like so. And then come over to our weights, add a new weights folder and add a new file called weights.component.css. So in here, I can add this code snippet that I have, and I'll talk you through it. And it's basically saying, anytime you see a chart class on this component, and then I want you to add these CSS properties. So this will set its width to 100% and a height to 300 pixels. And if we look at the HTML, we already have this class of chart on our base chart element. And then when we pop back to the browser, voila, we have a working chart. So just pull this down a bit. You can see here that we're getting a March, and we got 2 people. We got Duncan and Peter, and 2 weights of 75 and 90. But we're getting a bit messed up here with our CSS in our other spots, and things are starting to overlap. So it's time to use a bit of Bootstrap to set up some CSS. So first thing, I want to get this all to live inside of a container, so it's kind of centered and not squished to the sides. And then I want to add some rows so these things don't overlap. So if I go to my app component, the very first HTML we put on the page is here inside this inline HTML template. So I'm just going to add a div and give it a class of container, which is a Bootstrap CSS, which will wrap everything into the middle. So we're seeing this reload here with browser sync, and now we just want to fix some of this formatting down here. So if we come into our weights component.html, we do a couple of things. I'm just going to wrap the pig image in its own row. So I'm going to use some Zen coding or some Emmet here. So just .row and then tab will make me a div with the class row. And you'll see me use it quite a bit. I find it really handy for stubbing out the HTML, especially when you're used to all the classes in Twitter Bootstrap. And Alt-Shift-F to format that highlighted section. So that's in a row, so that'll help. And then I want to come down and put this into a div as well. So I'll just do a div, and I'm just going to put our chart inside of a div as well. Now I'm not just going to select everything and format the page here, because it will take all of these out of alignment. So you'll see me just only align parts of the page here to keep this format, because I find it much easier to read than if I do this. So I'll just undo that and leave it as so. Okay, so we pop back to the browser now. Things are starting to look much cleaner. We've got everything inside of a container, and it's not perfect, but it's much better. So our next step from where we're at here is, so we have our chart and we have it working and it looks pretty good and it's pretty responsive. If I resize that, you'll see that it shrinks down. I'll just open that back up. And we need to add this Crud functionality. Currently we can't edit this table at all, and we have no options to create a new user or to save that data. So if we have a look at where we're going to, it's going to look a little bit like this. So we're going to get this add person and save Crud functionality now, and we're going to add all these input fields with two-way binding with Angular 2. So first off, let's go to our HTML again, give us a bit more space, and I'm going to add a nav bar. So I'm going to use some more Zen coding, so it'll be nav element, and then it's going to have a class on it of nav bar, and then it'll have another one of navbar light, and another one of background faded. And then that's going to give us a navbar, and then we want to have a span with a class of pull XS right. And I push tab and it will add that. Now, you're probably going, hey, I use Bootstrap a whole bunch and I've never seen a pull right with a media query like XS in it. And that's because I'm using the beta version of Bootstrap, which is Bootstrap 4. Now, we're using a beta version for Angular and a beta version for the charts and a beta version of Rx.JS. So I just think better off using all the latest stuff at the same time to get that running. A bit more of an overhead sometimes, but Bootstrap 4 is not too different, comes with a whole bunch of new features. I really like it. So once we've got this span, we want to add those buttons. So again, I'm going to use some Zen coding. So there'll be a button with a class of button and also button default, and then tab, and it's going to be a save button. We want to add an Angular 2 click event. So going to use the brackets and put in a click. So this is a event binding to a DOM event of click. And then I'm going to call save a function in my waits component that I haven't written yet and execute that function. I'm going to make another button. This one's going to be call a create function, and the button text will be add person, like so. So if we pop back over now and we actually go have a look at the version we're working on, we've got this save button and this add person, but we need to hook those up and call our backend, which I have running in the background. So from here, we can Alt-Tab to get our command palette and go to our waits component, and we can add these two functions. I'm just going to add them under our get method here, so we're going to have a save function, and we're going to have a create function. So let's start with the create. So when I call create, I'm going to pass in a new person. So I'm just going to do a let person equals a new person, like so. And then we've already set up our people service here, and we're injecting it with our dependency injection. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to go this dot people service, and I'm going to call a create function on that service that doesn't exist. So TypeScript straight away is going, hey, that doesn't exist on the people service, this property of create, but we'll come back and add it in a second. So that I'm going to pass in a person there that we've just made, and I'm also going to pass in this dot selected year, because you want to be able to select which year you're going to create this person, and then you're going to add them back into this page, which each kind of view of that table is based on year. So we need to add a selected year. But we haven't got that yet, so I'm going to come up to the top and add it. So underneath our date, which we're initializing, I'm going to add a selected year, and it's going to be of type number. And I'm going to initialize it to be this dot date dot get full year, like so. So once we call this people service and this create method, we're going to be able to subscribe to it, which we covered in the first part of this series, how when we call our backend now with Angular 2, we get back an observable. So we subscribe to those observables versus promises where we did a dot then. So I'm going to subscribe to it, and I know I'm going to get back a person. And when I get that person back, I'm going to map it onto this dot people. But Angular 2, for the change detection system, loves to be passed a new object when you're changing stuff. So rather than just changing the people array on the this dot people object, I'm actually going to turn this dot people into a new array with the right parts on it. So I'm going to have an array here, and I'm going to use a rest parameter. So I'm going to say, take the current list of people. So dot 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 this dot people is a rest parameter. So pass in each of the persons in this people array into this new array inside these square brackets, and then also pass in the person that I get back from this subscribe, and map that to the this.people. So that has got our create function made, but we need to go to our people service and add this create function in our service to call our backend. So I need to go here, so I'm just going to click on there and F12 to go over to our people service. In Visual Studio it seems to work much better, just F12ing anywhere, but I find in Visual Studio Code I tend to have to F12 from there, which is almost as easy as just using the command palette like that. I'm sure it'll get better. So I'm going to copy our get function in our service here and paste that in and call it create. And I have to do a few changes for this. First of all, Alt-Shift-F to format, is this create, we know because we just made it, or just called it from our weights component, takes a person of type person, and it also takes a year of type number. Now, we haven't got the person property or the person class here available for our models because we haven't imported it yet. So let's do that. So import, and I'm going to use one of those extensions that I really love called relative path, and look for our models and bring in the TypeScript one, take off the .ts. And then in here, I know that I can get our person object. So once I have that, I need to change this from being in our create function here, change it from a get to a post, because we're posting up a new person. And I'll straight away get some issues and some red squigglies. And you can see here it's saying that a post takes a string of the URL and it takes a body of string. So we're going to need to JSON.stringify the body we're sending up, which is our person, and an optional options. And we have to set this because I'm using a ASP.NET Core backend and it expects certain headers to work. So I'm not going to pass up this date object that I've copied. I'm passing up the year, and then we're going to put in the body. And the body we will JSON.stringify and pass in our person. And then our third parameter there is going to be an object of headers, and it will be this dot headers. So we don't have this yet, this dot headers, so I'm going to initialize it at the top, and it will be of type headers, and we know that we have that already because I've imported headers up here. But we don't have it yet, we haven't made this dot headers. And I've got a little code snippet to save you watching me type a lot of these out. I like to just make this once, so I'm going to have a function here, Alt-Shift-F to format. I've just pasted in called make headers. So basically, I new up a new set of headers, and then I append onto it the content type and application JSON, and then I set this dot headers to equal that headers. But I need to call this once for every time I initialize this service. So in here, I'm going to do this dot make headers and call it. So as a one-off, I'm going to go make this headers and initialize this dot headers, and then I can use it in all of my HTTP requests here. So with that done, we have the create method working. But I want to do a few extra things here to tidy this up and do a bit of Boy Scouting, which is just cleaning up your code as you go. And one thing is we've got no error handling, no catches on our backend requests here from our service. And also we're just saying our return type of all of these functions is just an any. And I want to make it a little bit more strongly typed and make it a bit more of a stronger application. So up here, I'm going to bring in another operator called catch from Rx.JS. And I'm also going to import observable. So import Rx.JS/observable, and we want to bring in the observable. Okay, so with that, I can come along and I have an any here. So I'm saying this create function returns an any, but actually I want it to return an observable of type person. Okay, and we might as well clean up as well our get method here. And that returns an observable of person array, like so. And now we want to add on some error handling. So we brought in this catch operator, so let's use it. So I've got another little code snippet here, which is an error handling function. So rather than repeating this for every function we have here, we're just going to share it. So it's a private handle error function, and it takes in the error and it just logs out the error and it throws an exception. So to use this, we can come in and add a catch operator, which takes the callback of this dot handle error, like so, and that's all we need to do. So if we get an error, we're going to see it in the console now. In a real application, we would log it or handle it differently, but for now, we'll just console log it. And that's us. So now we've done a bit of Boy Scouting and we have a bit of error handling and we've got a more strongly typed service here. So things should be working for our create function. If we go back over to the browser and we come up here and we click add person, we can see that it's added a person here, although the next row is white, so we won't see it. So I'm going to just do it again, and you can see it added 2 new people, but they're empty, and it's added 2 new rows. And that automatically saves that add person as we go. But we need to add some Crud functionality now here to be able to add in and edit these values in the table and also click save. So let's do the save first, and then we'll come back and add the input fields. So if we flip back over to our HTML, you can remember we set up this click event on the save button. So if we go over to our component, we have stubbed out a save function. And in here, we want to call our people service again. And this time we're going to be calling a put method. So we're going to have a put, and we're going to pass in this.people. And it's very similar to the other one. We're going to do a subscribe, and we're going to get back an observable, and that will be we're going to have a people, and all I'm going to do here actually is I'm just going to log out to the console this, just say people saved, like so. So we have to write this put method here, and we'll head back over to our people service. And I'm just going to copy the create. It's pretty quick once you have one of these set up to do other HTTP requests. And I'm going to call it put. And then in here, I know that it just takes a people, which will be a person array. And we don't have any other parameters, so I'll get rid of the year. And I know it's going to return back an array of person. And the URL is just straight person with a put method. And I am going to pass the body will be a string of people. And that's it. That's all we need to do here for this one to become and change the HTTP to be a put, not a post. So now we're making a put request to our backend, and we're passing it the people, and we're going to get back a people array. So that should be working. And if we pop over and we have a look here, if I was to just clean out the console and zoom in a little bit, give us a bit more room here, and I click save, you'll see it says people saved, but there was nothing to save because we haven't changed any values. So let's now be able to change some of these values, and to do that we're going to use two-way data binding in Angular 2. So pop back over to our wait component.html, and in here we have a table, and in the table we have a full name for each row, and then we have the weights for each month. But they're just, it's just two-way binding here. We're just interpolating the values. Sorry, it's not two-way binding. We're just interpolating the values straight onto the page. So this is where we use the new banana in a box, some people are calling it, or the ng model directive, which allows us to get two-way data binding. And the syntax is pretty crazy. So I'm just going to put an input box here, and I'm going to go make a banana in a box, and you can see why they call it that. It's a box with round brackets in the middle, and ng model is the Angular directive, and it's going to equal our object on our model, which is person.fullname. So I'm going to talk about this a little more, but I just want to see if that's working. If we come back over here, we can see now that we have got all of those in input boxes and they're two-way bound. So we've got the square brackets, which is saying this is a property binding onto this person.fullname property. And then we have an event binding, which is the round brackets. So anytime this is changed in the input field or changed elsewhere, we're going to both raise an event and bind the values back. So this is how you achieve two-way data binding in Angular 2. Okay, so with that done, I can actually just copy that whole thing. And where we're interpolating out the value here in one-way binding with this weight.kilogram, I'm going to put in this input field and do two-way binding, not to the person.fullname, but to the weight.kilogram. And then we will have two-way data binding for the weight. So if we have a look here, we get pretty ugly input boxes here. We need to do a little bit of CSS work to actually make this fit on the page. And I've got a code snippet for that to save us some time. So if we pop back over and we look at our Solution Explorer in our CSS for this component, I'm going to paste in here CSS. So basically, every input, make it a width of 35 and also make its padding 2 pixels, except for the ones with a class of name, which I want to make a little bit wider. Now, for formatting this code, I've got another Visual Studio Code extension, which is called Format CSS, and I just call it like so in the command palette to format that. So when we pop back, we have a look. Now we have nice little square boxes for all our input, and we just need to put that name class, the CSS class, on the name input field. So pop back to the HTML and give us a bit more room. And down here on our input, I'm going to add a class of name, like so. So now we'll be getting a bit better styling. This error we're seeing here in the console is actually a Chrome bug. And I'm kind of living with some of these small little errors for now. If I wanted to use a different browser like Mozilla or Firefox, I could, this error will go away, and there's some people chatting about it on GitHub and online. But for now, I'm just going to live with it because I'm sure as Angular gets closer to leaving beta, a lot of these things will get cleaned up. Okay. So we have this at the moment. So let's see if we can change and add another person called Sarah and click the save button here. And it says people saved. So I should be able to refresh the page now. And when we pull back from the database, our Sarah is being saved and bound again. Now the last thing that I want to do here, we've got all of this kind of wired up for some Crud functionality and our first chart in Angular 2. But when I go enter in here 67 kilograms for February for Mary and I tab onto the next cell, the chart doesn't change. So I need to hook up a change event on these input fields and re-update or update the chart. So let's do that as our last step. So coming over, we have this input field here for the weight, and I'm going to put on here an event binding. And this is the new Angular 2 syntax for it, and it's going to be a change event. If a change event is raised on this input, I'm going to call input, or actually what it's actually doing is updating the chart, this function, so I'm going to call it update chart. So if any of those input values change, we're going to call update chart, which we haven't written yet. So I'm going to go do that now in our weight component. And put it underneath our create function. Okay, so update chart. The first thing we're going to need to do is make a new people object so that change detection is aware of it. So I'm going to do this.people equals, and we saw this before, a rest parameter, where we're going to make a new array and pass in each of the persons in the current this.people array. So this.people. So basically, I'm passing Angular's change detection a new object. for the this.people rather than just changing some of its properties. And then I'm going to call the chart format chart data function, which will then go and reformat all the chart data into that chart class or object. And hey presto, we should see it update. So if we come back over to our chart here, it would have automatically refreshed in the background. And if I add a 77 and then I lose focus on this input, we'll see that the chart is updating as we go and adding in those values. And I can push save and refresh, and all of that will get saved over into our backend. So that's all we're going to cover in this part of Dev Superpowers in our second of a two-part series on Angular 2. And we've covered a truck ton of stuff. It's been really fun making this two-part series and going a little bit away from Hello World and making something that's kind of squeezed us into having to overcome a couple of issues using a third-party library like Chart.js and ng2-charts and some formatting and some other issues. So where to from here? Well, please like and subscribe below in the comments. And also, I want to show you a link here to our Fire Bootcamp online for Angular 2. This is a 6-week course where we take someone from start to finish or from good to great with Angular 2 in 6 weeks. It's an online course. The big different thing about this course is we give you all this great material to learn every week, but we meet up online for 2 sessions a week with an experienced Angular 2 developer from the SSW team, and we unblock you. So if you're looking to go from good to great with your Angular 2 skills, then check out Angular 2 Dev Superpowers online. So my name's Duncan. Thanks for watching. Cheers.